I'd have liked to have started this video by saying that Call of Duty has finally acknowledged that there was hit registration issues in Warzone and Black Ops 6. And unfortunately, that's not what Call of Duty has done. Instead, they've decided to release a tweet which you can see on screen here, which seems to be blaming those hit registration issues on something entirely different. I'm going to show you in this video why Call of Duty is in fact suffering from hit registration problems in Warzone and Black Ops 6, and why this tweet has led to them being accused of gaslighting their own community, including from myself. And quite frankly, depending on how you view this tweet that they've decided to do, you could say that it was just a miscommunication, a misfire, or just downright dishonest. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like, consider subscribing. We're nearly close to 200k and it helps me on the road to that goal. Hit registration, both in Black Ops 6 and in Warzone, has clearly not been functioning properly since its release. And in the background, I've collected a number of different clips from a number of different people, myself included, ranging from the US to the UK, to illustrate that this is a universal problem with the game. The great thing about these clips is that they are so varied. They come from a number of different people, all with really solid internet connections from different locations in the world. And every single one of them is using different weapons, Modern Warfare 3 weapons, Black Ops 6 weapons, at different ranges as well, some of them being extremely close range. So it strips away all of the other variables that could be interfering with hit-reg. This is not some magical issue that is specific to a certain weapon or specific to a certain scenario. It is a universal problem that's facing the game, and thankfully, all of these various examples that people have posted has verified that. And the greater part about these clips is that a lot of them are also taking place at extremely close ranges, which means that bullet velocity and projectiles shouldn't necessarily be a concern for some of these clips like Huskers with the XM4, where it should pretty much be instantaneous hit scan. So hit registration being a problem is an undeniable fact. It is something that Call of Duty can't contest. So this tweet, which says that they are looking into a visual issue that can result in erroneous visual blood effects when damage was not actually dealt, is kind of a slap in the face. This is basically them highlighting a symptom of what does make up generally bad hit registration, as opposed to giving you a full diagnosis. The ironic thing about the visual blood effects in the game is that they're very obviously illustrating that hit registration is a problem. Granted, they aren't perfect, and we will talk about that and elaborate on it, but what Call of Duty has effectively said here is, rather than acknowledging that hit registration is an issue, they're looking into making it less obviously clear that hit registration is an issue. This would be like you showing up to a doctor complaining that you have a temperature, and rather than the doctor using a thermometer, the thermometer was taken away from him, and he just sort of has to vaguely eyeball as to whether or not it's a problem. Let's start by addressing the post's main claim that there are erroneous blood visual effects happening in-game, and this is a two-pronged situation, one of which definitely is an underlying issue, the other of which is actually something that just illustrates that the game is suffering from poor servers. This first clip is a clip from Freund COD, and I've shown similar clips on my own channel in the multiplayer environment where hitboxes clearly aren't working as intended. There are times where you shoot a character model and don't get a hit marker, and times where you shoot around a character model and do get a hit marker. And every single time you are going to receive a visual blood splatter. This basically just means that hitboxes are not working as intended. It means that there are areas and elements of certain character models that appear to just not be functioning properly. You can very clearly see in this clip that this is in a live public Warzone environment, and he is shooting a character very clearly in the head and not receiving any registration for it, but he is receiving the visual feedback. He should be dealing damage to this opponent when shooting him in the head, but that is not the case. There has been lots of seemingly scaling differences between Black Ops 6 and Modern Warfare 3 in terms of character models or world models, so I would probably attribute some of the issue to that. But what this doesn't underlyingly change is the second part of the equation, which means that these visual effects like blood are tied to your client and not the server. And what this means is that on your game client, the game client itself is convinced that you did in fact hit that target, and that visual blood effect is being shown because of that. And in the instances you can see on screen here, he has hit the target. It's simply a defunct hitbox that is seemingly causing problems. But what he hasn't done is dealt damage. So what Call of Duty is likely claiming in this tweet is that visual blood effects shouldn't be playing on your game client if the server itself hasn't registered damage. If you think of the server as a logbook for activity and damage being one of the activities, Call of Duty is implying that the blood effect should be tied to the actual damage itself that's received on the server and shouldn't be coming from your own client. And that's fine, and that probably should be the case. But the irony of this is that it highlights a much larger problem. Hitboxes are definitely not entirely functional and not entirely correct. But from the sheer background that you can see in this video, the vast array of different clips with different weapons, different calibers of ammunition, different circumstances, including some where characters are even standing still, there is absolutely, unequivocally no way that Call of Duty can claim that this is an erroneous blood visual effect when people are very clearly hitting their target. And what's actually happened is that this visual blood effect, which is tied to the client and not the server, is simply exposing the fact that there is a huge underlying hit registration issue in this game, where the vast majority of bullets that should be connecting with their target and should be dealing damage are not dealing damage. And this is happening across Warzone and Black Ops 6, despite Black Ops 6 having 60Hz servers and Warzone having 20Hz servers, which is dramatically lower performance. So bear in mind at this point that the visual blood effects that you're seeing in-game right now are basically highlighting a problem. And this is going to make much more sense when I show you this next clip, which is also from FreundCod, and again, something that I have tested myself. Now, what you're seeing in this video right now is FreundCod adding artificial delay to his own connection. This is called packet delay, and it can lead to something called packet burst. So this isn't coming from the Call of Duty servers, this is him deliberately delaying his own connection. And when he delays his own connection, you can very clearly see that all of these no registration examples that we're seeing online have striking similarities. The difference being is that in this example, the delay is actually coming from the client itself. This is artificial and it's been inflicted upon the game, and it isn't the fault of Call of Duty. But it does show how a single issue with any kind of networking can relate to no registration examples that we've seen, like all of these clips in the background. Now, the problem with this is that these no registration examples are happening to people who have perfectly good internet connections and are playing on perfectly good localized servers. Myself, the Real Slim JD, and also Huskers, who also feature in the background of these clips, are all fiber to the premises internet connections on local servers using Ethernet, which means unless there is a dramatic issue with our ISP, there should be no packet delay coming from our end. And I've ratified this on my own end a number of times with ISP quality connection tests and verifying from my own end that there is no kind of issue impacting the sending and receiving of packets, either at a router level, an ISP level, or a connection level. And I've tested this across 3 separate fiber connections in my own area. So in the instances that I'm describing to you right now, the client itself is not to blame, which means that when a hit registration isn't being registered properly, that is coming from the Call of Duty servers themselves. And what makes this more painstakingly obvious to me and pretty much anybody who's ever done any kind of server deployment in the entire world is that these problems get dramatically worse the second peak hours hit. From about 4 p.m. onwards in your own local time zone till about midnight in the same time zone, you are going to witness dramatic server degradation in terms of quality. And you're going to see more and more instances like this clip in the background where blood splatter is showing, it shows that you've connected a shot, but you are not giving that opponent damage. And this simply means that the people that Call of Duty are using to deploy these servers or the netcode that is associated with it is simply not good enough. If you've ever hosted a server back in the day for something like Battlefield, or even if you host servers now for things like Squad, you would likely associate what we're seeing in Call of Duty with CPU load reaching a maximum. And you would probably be entirely correct. If I was to hazard a guess as to what we're seeing from Call of Duty server infrastructure, it simply illustrates to me that a number of instances of Warzone or multiplayer are taking place on these mega servers. They are reaching a peak in terms of CPU load because they're running too many instances off of individual machines. That ends up leading to server degradation across the entire board and pretty much leads to everybody having hit registration issues. It also likely means that these servers are struggling to maintain 60Hz for multiplayer and also struggling to maintain 20Hz for Warzone. All of this would be a lot visually clearer if Call of Duty had functioning network icons, but these haven't worked properly as far as I'm aware since Modern Warfare 2019. They will occasionally tell you if there's packet burst or packet loss, but for the most part, the thresholds to this don't seem to be particularly sensitive, and there are examples that I've seen personally whilst playing where packet loss or packet burst is clearly quite obviously happening, and the game isn't registering it as occurring. I would love to be able to finish off and round out this video by saying that I thought this tweet was just misworded, misplaced, or misrepresented. But honestly, it wasn't. The blood splatter and visual effects that we're seeing in game right now are very clearly illustrating to a large number of people and causing a PR storm for Call of Duty that their server infrastructure isn't good enough. You can watch Call of Duty servers have an absolute heart attack every single evening around 6 p.m. onwards. You can watch bad hit-reg, you can see servers start to deal with things like packet loss, start to deal with things like lag, and seemingly this is happening on both their 60Hz deployments of multiplayer and their 20Hz deployments of Warzone. I just don't think this tweet was very genuine, and I think it was deliberately misleading to imply that there was some kind of bug with visuals as opposed to there being a genuine hit-reg problem, which, as has been illustrated online quite clearly, there is a fairly large one. As for the solution, it's probably a combination of a few things. A, fixing general visual feedback issues, including blood splatter, is definitely something that should occur and should be a staple of any game, and making sure that your hitboxes align with your general character models. The second thing, obviously, is just spending more money on servers. I don't think they're paying for particularly highly performant servers, and if they are, they're definitely not getting their money's worth. But it's very clearly a scaling problem for Call of Duty. The second servers get busy, the second population starts picking up in the game, the infrastructure of the game seemingly starts to fail. And the third and final thing is just to rework their netcode. I think it's safe to say at this point that IWA, or the entire Infinity Ward engine, which is now just the Call of Duty engine at this point, is starting to show some genuine problems with networking that we're seeing pretty much every integration, pretty much every single year. And you only need to think back to the time where they tried adding AI to, general 150 player maps in Call of Duty to see just how badly this can go. I don't have access to Call of Duty's code, and we don't know how their engine entirely works, but just on a basic development of game dev, they do not have the most intensive tasks to run, both in terms of Warzone and in terms of Black Ops 6. Even calculating bullet ballistics these days and calculating physics-based projectiles isn't a massive task. The only thing I can assume is that there are some unoptimized network elements within their game which we've seen before, like when they added AI to Modern Warfare 2. It could be airstrikes, it could be vehicle physics, it could be a number of things that are calculations-wise extremely taxing, but the basic principle is, this tweet was a load of nonsense. It basically highlights a problem that's part of a much wider problem rather than dealing with the issue itself. And there's a general logical term for those of you who have ever done philosophy called the fallacy of composition. And it's a logical fallacy that when someone assumes something that is true of the whole because it's true of the part of a whole. It would be like me playing on Wi-Fi with terrible internet and then telling you that Call of Duty servers are awful. That is not the case here. We are seeing creators from across the world post loads of clips, many of them with fiber broadband to the premises, many of them with perfect domestic infrastructure, all of them under ideal or ideally almost immaculate network conditions for a game like Warzone. So the answer is simply that it's Call of Duty's time to actually deal with this issue and stop trying to sweep it under the rug. So folks, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like, drop a subscribe. We're on the road to 200k, and I'll see you again in the next one.